as you would know, the main goal of the African Development Bank, our main mandate, what we live for, is to see to the economic transformation of the African continent. We're not just concerned about the quantity of growth, but we're also concerned about the quality of growth. And we came to that realization that we cannot follow the developmental pathway of those that had gone before us, because we definitely would not be able to say, let's grow today, by whatever means, and clean up tomorrow. And we felt we needed to improve the quality of our growth, use much of our natural resources, do things that would be better. And so we came up with the bank's 10-year strategy. And that 10-year strategy had benefited from consultations all across the continent, even outside the continent. And we came up with two main objectives. The first being that we want to see an inclusive growth in Africa. African countries were growing, among the fastest growing, but it was not inclusive. We still had lots of pockets of poverty. Certain sectors were growing very well. The extractives, we just cut and sell. We dig from the ground, we sell. And we needed that growth to be inclusive. Women were left out, youths were left out. Then the second objective was, how do we, with this, transition Africa to a green growth pathway? Let's not do it the way others have done it. And so that's what brought about this. And let me say that this came at a point that this idea wasn't very popular then. But the bank knew that we just need to grow differently.
Anthony, of course, speaking about this particular project that was kicked off in 2014, we're 4 years down the road and 6 more to go. But the entire idea was to look at the significant risks and opportunities for action, and this mostly included the climate change. Of course, we know that Africa is prone to climate change. We're one of the least emitting continents, but if the trend goes on as we're looking at, Africa stands to be one of the biggest gas emitters in the world. But tell me right now, with all of this that has been happening, have we seen any impact from this particular project or from all the green projects that we're looking at towards climate change and green growth?
Yeah, and thank you very much. Like you've rightly said, we're a low-emitting continent. And what I've always said is, this is worth emulating. We talk about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The world out there wants to be like African countries. They want to be like us, low emitters. Incidentally, some of us want to be like them, high emitters. And, and I can't really understand why we want to be like those who want to be like us. We have what it takes. Yes, we're low emitters. We have commitments. The international community has committed that they would help developing countries, most of them are in Africa anyway, to maintain a low carbon development pathway. And right now, yes, globally, we contribute about 3% of the greenhouse gas emissions, true. But then we also access just about 3% of the total climate resources. And we feel this is embarrassing, this is not right. What would it take for us to increase our access? It's what the African Development Bank is working on with other partners. That how do we prepare the African continent to access these global resources that are out there? Resources will be given through projects, will be given through investments. And we cannot just go out and tell people, give us money. And I'm sure you're aware that just 2 weeks ago, we had the Africa Investment Forum.
In Johannesburg.
In Johannesburg. That then packaged projects that showcased Africa's projects. It is these projects now that will bring together or that will increase our access to climate finance.
It's interesting that you're speaking about the projects, of course, that we saw at the Africa Investment Forum that was happening in Johannesburg. Of course, CNBC was on ground for all the details. We saw signings of about 45 deals, worth about $23 billion, if I'm not mistaken. Tell me, are some of this aligned with green growth?
Actually, for the ones we prepared, it was very important.
All right.
Because, the president of the bank has a good vision. He's an incurably optimistic person about the continent. And we know that each of the projects that went through had climate change and green growth mainstreamed into them. Because for us, it's a cross-cutting issue. No project gets out to be funded if we have not looked at climate change, how it contributes to green growth, how gender, is reflected in those projects. So as we continue to increase this project, we are going to continuously also attract resources from the outside world. Because it's not as if there's a fiscal wall that stops African countries from accessing these monies. We need the projects, we need the capacities for them to develop good projects, and we're working on that.
Anthony, let's look at the role of the youth at all of these levels, because we know Africa's biggest resource right now is the youth. And we are looking to bank on the youth for actually economic growth, which is, we're still looking at a lot of economies that are fast growing, of course, Rwanda being one of them, and it's because they fronted the youth. But tell me now, some of us are looking at the youth as the entrepreneurs of tomorrow, right? But again, as economies grow, we're still looking at exactly the same issue of urbanization, of big populations of people also in a very small environment that is leading to all of these disasters that we're looking at with climate. We're not going to fight the population. How do we use it to our advantage?
Thanks. Let me maybe correct you there. We don't see the youth as the entrepreneurs of tomorrow. We see them as the entrepreneurs of today.
Oh,
now.
That's a good one.
That's how we see our youths. And we do not look at Africa's youth population as an issue, as a problem. We see it as a resource. We see it as a blessing. And so, for us at the African Development Bank, we have initiatives focused on bringing this very important and vital segment of the society on board. I can tell you, for instance, we have the Enable Youth program in agriculture. Those days, people didn't want to be called farmers because they thought farming was for the elderly who retired and those in the village. These are agri-business men and women.
It's not always sounded cool. It's just starting to sound cool now.
Yeah, because now we're letting people know that there's no thing cooler than being in agriculture.
All right.
So we're bringing them in. We've created several youth skills acquisition centers. Here in Rwanda, we know we have that. We contribute to the Youth Connect. We've also contributed to the Rwanda Innovation Fund for Youth. So these are things we're doing because we know that the future belongs to the youth. We have a program on fashionomics, billions of dollars worth of industry in the fashion industry.
All right.
Where those mainly there is the youths. And we have a large program, a huge program on them. So we believe that the only way we can get the continent to grow. I started by saying the growth we were having was not inclusive. Our youth were just being seen as a menace somehow because we had too much youth. If you run an inclusive development, you will realize that the youths are very important and they need to be brought on board. And so that's very important to us.
Let's move away from just the inclusive growth, of course, talking about the gender inclusiveness and the youth also in these particular conversations. Let's look at the financiers.
Okay.
Are we seeing actually a financial institution piquing interest in supporting such projects, green growth projects in Africa?
I think, let me tell you this, virtually every financial institution is seeing the value of this or has already seen the value of this. And right now at the African Development Bank, we've established what we call the African Financial Alliance on Climate Change.
All right.
And what this is doing is bringing together everyone in the financial sector, the central banks because of their policies, the stock exchanges because of their market listing, the institutional investors that hold about 75% of the resources that we need for this. We have the commercial banks, we have the insurance industries. These people have come together to say, look, there is opportunity. There is business to be done. and they're seeing the value of coming together. So virtually every institution. And let me tell you this. We went to Paris, COP21.
All right.
Most African countries and the rest of the world signed what we call the nationally determined contributions. And the African continent collectively put there that they would need about between $3 and $4 trillion to implement this plan by 2030. Man, that is a huge market. We're not looking at money. We need to find a way to get them. This is a huge market. You know, what is that market of? Take away climate change. It's about energy. It's about food. It's about transportation.
All right.
So if you have a large growing urban population that need to move from point A to point B, a good businessman will look at the business opportunity there. He can create mass transit systems. They can do railway systems that will move these growing people out there. And in so doing, you're reducing emissions. You're making sure that people don't use their individual cars to be moving. Government will need to set that policy. The commercial banks need to know that they can provide these loans because the development banks are putting the risking facilities, are guaranteeing those loans.